She never flinched when they tore her shirt. She never panicked when they sabotaged her gear. And when they threw her into drills designed to make her fail, she moved with the kind of precision only top-tier operators ever learn. That's when the truth started to surface. Captain Leia Anders was never just a desk officer.
Have you ever been humiliated in front of everyone for something that was completely meaningless? Colonel Victor Hale was turning it into a spectator sport. His voice cut through the bitter morning cold like a razor. Captain Anders, if you can't even get your uniform right, maybe this job is too much for you. 60 people stopped and stared, their breath fogging up the air. And right in the center of it all was Captain Leia Anders. She was maybe 5'4", hair pulled back so tight it had to hurt, with eyes that looked like a storm rolling in. But she didn't move. She just stood there, breathing slow and steady. And if you think you know how this story goes, you should probably stick around because you have no idea. The colonel stepped down from his platform, his shiny boots echoing on the pavement as he circled her like a predator. "Do you all see this?" he shouted, jabbing a finger at a grease spot on her gray t-shirt so small you could barely see it in the dim light. "This is what happens when we lower our standards. When we let in time's distractions, asterisk." He spat that last word out, and everyone knew he meant because she was a woman. A couple of guys in the formation snickered. Leia's face was a mask of calm, but her knuckles were white. Hale leaned in close, his nasty coffee breath hitting her face. "I should send you right back to whatever desk you crawled out from under. But first," Hale roared. "Corporal Briggs, front and center!" A mountain of a man named Jake Briggs stepped forward. He was 240 pounds of pure muscle and arrogance, and had been grinning through the whole thing. "Sir!" he barked. The colonel just waved a dismissive hand. "The captain's shirt. I need you to, confirm times it meets regulation." The order was so out of line that a dead silence fell over the group. For just a second, even Briggs hesitated before moving behind Leia. She didn't even stiffen, she just kept breathing, in and out. Briggs grabbed the back of her collar. "Ma'am, this won't take long," he said, his voice oozing with fake respect. Then he ripped it. The sound of tearing fabric was like a crack of lightning in the silent morning. The shirt tore wide open, all the way down her back. The cold air hit her skin, and you could hear dozens of people gasp. But they weren't shocked by the humiliation. They were staring at what the torn shirt revealed. Her entire back was covered by an incredible, hyper-detailed tattoo of a giant hawk. Its wings spread from shoulder to shoulder, talons out. You could see every single feather. There was writing across the bird's chest and along its wings, too small to make out, but the artistry was absolutely breathtaking. This wasn't some cheap, blurry tattoo. This was a masterpiece, and it was something more. In the back, an old-timer's eyes narrowed with recognition, but then the snickering started. "Whoa, that's some bird," someone muttered. "Did she get that at a theme park?" Another guy joked, and a wave of laughter followed. Colonel Hale stood there with his arms crossed, a smug smirk plastered on his face. "Well, Captain, I must say, that's quite impressive," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Tell me, did that piece of art cost more than your first paycheck?" The crowd laughed even harder. Leia just stood there, completely still, the shredded shirt hanging off her. As the sun started to rise, its first rays lit up the ink, making the hawk look like it was about to fly right off her back. Hale squinted, trying to read the text on its chest. "What's that say? Something inspiring like 'just breathe'?" he mocked, and the whole formation lost it. Briggs, who was still holding a piece of her shirt, added, "Looks like one of those tattoos you get after watching too many action movies, sir." Hale nodded sagely. "Ah, the 'I wish I was a real soldier' special. Bet she drives a big truck, too." He turned to address all of them. "Let this be a lesson for all of you. You can cover yourself in all the ink you want, but you can't buy real skill or experience." He shot Leia a final, nasty look. "Get a new shirt, Captain, and cover that thing up. This is a military base, not an art gallery." And with that, he waved them off. Leia finally let out a long, slow breath. She turned and walked away, her head held high, not saying a single word. Behind her, the whispers fired up again. "Can you believe that? Probably got it on a spring break trip. Looks like she ran out of money before they could finish it. But way in the back, Sergeant Major Thomas Hayes wasn't smiling at all. Hayes was 58 years old, with 32 years in the service. He'd seen everything, and he saw what these younger guys were missing. That style of ink, you don't get that on a boardwalk. That was the kind of tattoo soldiers get in the field, the kind that tells a story. As Laya disappeared into her barracks, he glanced at the man next to him, Commander Adam Reed, a Navy SEAL. Reed was just staring at the space where Laya had been standing. "See something that interests you, Commander?" Hayes asked quietly. Reed slowly shook his head. "Her posture," he said. "When that gorilla put his hands on her, she didn't even react. She stood there like she was completely used to it." Hayes grunted. Used to what? Reed's jaw was tight. Pain. Absolute control. The only people I've ever seen stand that still have been through CRE training. Survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. It's one of the most brutal training programs on the planet, reserved for elite special forces. Hayes' eyebrows shot into his hairline. "You think she's more than a paper pusher?" Reed didn't answer. A few minutes later, inside a bathroom, Laya stared at her reflection in a cracked mirror. The ruined shirt was garbage, but the hawk on her back looked powerful under the buzzing fluorescent lights. She took a small metal coin out of her pocket, its edges worn smooth from years of being held. One side had a bird etched into it, the other had a string of numbers. She ran her thumb over it before placing it carefully on the edge of the sink. Her expression in the mirror was perfectly neutral, no anger, no humiliation, just that same steady breathing. And then, for the first time all morning, a small smile touched her lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a grandmaster in chess who just watched their opponent fall for the oldest trick in the book. She put on a fresh shirt, slipped the coin back into her pocket, and walked right back out to face them. For the rest of the day, she was the punchline to every joke. At breakfast, someone asked if she was planning to fly the coop. A different instructor sarcastically asked if she had any more hidden talents. Laya said nothing. She did her job, processed her forms, and managed logistics, the kind of invisible work that keeps a base running. By lunchtime, her name had become an insult. Pulling in Anders was the new phrase for being all talk and no action. Some lieutenant who loved to stir the pot even started a group chat with a cartoon bird sticker, calling it the captain who couldn't. Over 20 people joined that chat in the first hour. Laya never saw it, but she saw everything else. She was watching. She noted who laughed the loudest, who looked away in embarrassment, and the very few who looked a little bit afraid. Meanwhile, in his office, Colonel Hale looked over her file. Captain Laya Anders, aged 29, intelligence analyst. A few quiet postings, now here as a liaison. Her service record showed 0 combat deployments, 0 field experience, 0 anything. He slammed the folder shut, feeling completely justified. Just another desk jockey trying to look tough, he thought to himself. He'd seen her type 1,000 times. The tattoo was probably the most exciting thing that had ever happened to her. But Hale had bigger fish to fry. Laya was a loose thread in the perfect tapestry of his command, and he couldn't have any loose threads. Not with a major audit coming up, and definitely not with a few questionable financial records he needed to keep buried. He had to make an example of her, and it had to be now. He decided he'd show everyone what a times, real-time soldier looked like. He made one phone call. The next morning, Hale gathered everyone for an announcement. "Captain Anders, you have a new assignment. For today, you'll be joining Bravo team for the live fire, close quarters combat drill." You could have heard a pin drop. "Since you're so concerned with appearances," he added with a nasty little smile, "here's your chance to prove there's some substance too. Your equipment is waiting for you. Be on the range at 0800. This wasn't a training exercise for an analyst. This was for the best of the best, a high-speed, high-risk drill." And he just thrown her into the fire. Putting a desk officer in a drill like this wasn't a test. It was a setup for a spectacular failure, and Laya knew it. She just gave him a single, sharp nod. "Yes, sir." When she arrived at the range, she saw the gear they'd set out for her. The rifle was an ancient model, the stock was covered in dings, and the sights were so crooked You could see it from 10 feet away. Her tactical vest was 2 sizes too large, hanging off her like a potato sack. And her communications earpiece was already buzzing with static. The real Bravo team was gearing up nearby, watching her with a mix of pity and amusement. One of them, Corporal Miles Chen, finally walked over. "Ma'am, with all due respect, have you ever done this before?" Laya just pulled the straps on the oversized vest tighter. "I'll be fine." Chen shot a smug look at his teammates. "All right, Captain, listen up. The drill is pretty basic. Clear 3 rooms. You've got friendly targets mixed in with the bad guys. We go in, drop the hostiles, and save the friendlies. Your job is rear security. Basically, just hang back and try not to shoot us in the back." The team leader, a seasoned staff sergeant named Travis Cole, chimed in, his tone a little softer, but just as condescending. "Kidding. If this kind of thing isn't your speed, there's no shame in sitting it out. This is advanced CQB." Laya met his gaze, her face a blank canvas. "I think I can handle it," she repeated. Cole sighed dramatically. "Okay then. It's your funeral." The buzzer sounded. As the team stacked up by the door, Leia took her place at the very end, her rifle held in a perfect low-ready position. The door charge blew, and the team flooded into the room, a whirlwind of motion and shouted commands. Laya moved in right behind them. They breezed through the first room in seconds, 2 hostiles down, 0 hostages. But as they pushed into the second room, their swagger got the best of them. They moved too fast, too sure of themselves, and completely missed the deep corner. A hostile target popped up. Chen instinctively brought his rifle up, but his line of sight was blocked by a hostage target. He was stuck. "Chen, no shot! Reposition!" Cole yelled, but the drill clock was relentless. If a threat wasn't neutralized within 3 seconds, the whole team would fail. Cole was already cursing their failure when Laya made her move. She didn't go forward, she went sideways. 2 lightning-fast steps to her right gave her a brand new, perfectly clear angle. In one smooth, unbroken motion, her rifle was up and she fired a single, precise shot. The hostile target snapped back, dead center. Chen just stared, his mouth hanging open. "How did you—" But Laya was already gliding toward the third and final room. Cole blinked, shaking off his disbelief, and urged the team forward. The last room was a nightmare scenario. 4 hostiles, 2 hostages, all crammed into a tiny space. The team fumbled, getting in each other's way as they tried to find a clean shot. Someone had to take a risky angle. Without a moment's hesitation, Laya dropped to one knee, creating a new level to shoot from, and fired 2 quick, perfect shots. 2 more hostiles dropped. The hostages were completely unharmed. The drill ended. "Range is clear," a voice boomed over the loudspeaker. "Final time, 47 seconds. That's a new facility record. You could have heard a pin drop," the officer added. "And for those of you keeping score, the old record was 52 seconds, held by an instructor from SEAL Team 6. The guys just stood there, completely stunned. Chen glanced down at his state-of-the-art rifle and then back at Laya. What in the hell was that? Cole's expression had shifted from annoyed to utterly bewildered. "Captain, where on earth did you learn to shoot like that?" Laya calmly cleared her weapon and dropped the magazine. "Practice," she said, her voice flat. She set the rifle on the table and walked out of the room, leaving the entire team gawking after her. Cole immediately whipped out his phone and began typing furiously. High above, in the observation deck, a man named Hayes leaned into his monitor. "Play that again," he commanded. The technician replayed the footage in slow motion. Hayes wasn't watching the targets. He was watching Laya's feet. The way she sliced the pie at every corner, the flawless low-ready weapon carry, the perfect trigger discipline. Every single move screamed brutal efficiency, the kind forged over years of real-world gunfights. This wasn't just practice. This was muscle memory ingrained so deep it was second nature. He zoomed in on her grip, her thumbs forward, elbows tucked in tight textbook form for a Tier 1 operator. Hayes leaned back. "Commander Reed," he spoke into his headset, "you're going to want to get down here and see this for yourself." Reed arrived 10 minutes later. Hayes simply played the video. Reed watched intently, his face unreadable. When it finished, He pointed at the screen. Rewind to the second room. The shot she took from the side. Freeze it right there. Reed stared at the frozen image, breaking down her stance, her posture, how she angled her head. That's a JSOC technique, he said quietly. He was talking about the Joint Special Operations Command, the absolute best of the best, home to units like Delta Force and SEAL Team 6. The way she's using the door frame for stability, they only teach that in the Advanced Hostage Rescue course. The one for guys who do this for a living. Hayes nodded. And her shot group in the last room? I checked. Both rounds landed inside a 2-inch circle, from 15 feet, while kneeling, with a rifle that had jacked up sights. Reed rubbed his chin. She compensated for the bad sights without even test firing it, which means she knew the weapon was off the instant she picked it up, which means she knows her weapons, Heffa concluded. Like, asterisk really times knows them. They both looked at the image of Laya, her expression one of pure, calm focus. There was no trace of an adrenaline dump, no excitement, just a professional doing a job she had clearly done 1,000 times before. Reed pulled out his phone and started scrolling through her official service record again. It says right here she's an intelligence analyst, no advanced weapons training, no combat deployments, zip, zilch, nada. So where did she learn it? Hayes asked the empty room. Reed had no answer. Down on the range, Laya was alone. She had stayed behind to police her brass, an old habit from a past life. She methodically picked up 3 of the spent casings and arranged them on the floor in a small triangle. She stared down at the simple shape for a long moment, then scattered the shells with the toe of her boot. Some habits were just too dangerous to keep. As she turned to leave, she nearly walked right into Sergeant Carter, the range officer, who was nervously clicking a pen against his clipboard. Captain Anders, that was really something. Laya offered a brief, polite nod. Thank you. Carter cleared his throat, trying to find the right words. Look, I've been running this range for 8 years. I've seen Green Berets, Rangers, SEALs, even a few Delta operators come through. And you, ma'am, just shattered every single one of their records. Laya's expression didn't change. The conditions were ideal. There was no wind today. Carter stared at her, utterly baffled. Wind? Ma'am. This is an indoor range. Exactly, Laya said, and walked right past him, leaving him frozen in place. He looked down at the target analysis report. Every single one of her shots had landed in the thoracic triangle, the kill box. Not a single miss, not one wasted movement. He'd watched thousands of shooters over his career, but only a handful ever showed that kind of surgical precision. And all of them had one thing in common. They'd all seen combat. He keyed his radio. This is range control to Commander Reed. I need to speak with him immediately. It's urgent. If you have ever been underestimated, you know that incredible feeling of proving everyone wrong in the most spectacular way possible. Go ahead and smash that like button if you believe actions will always speak louder than words. And if you want to find out how this quiet storm is about to turn their entire world upside down, make sure you subscribe, because her story is just getting started. By dinner time, the story of Laya's unbelievable performance had spread like wildfire across the base. But it didn't earn her any respect. Instead, it just made people suspicious. Over in the mess hall, a guy named Foster was loudly giving his opinion to anyone who would listen. So what? She had a lucky run. Big deal. She probably practiced that exact drill for weeks. Someone at his table piped up, but how would she know which drill they were going to run? Foster waved his hand dismissively. She's a liaison officer, right? She probably got a sneak peek at the training schedule. It's obvious. A few guys nodded in agreement. It was the simplest explanation, the one that let their egos remain intact. A nerdy desk jockey had cheated to make them look bad. That was a much easier pill to swallow than the truth. At another table, a soldier named Briggs quietly chewed his food, his mind elsewhere. He wasn't there to see it, but he'd heard the rumors. 47 seconds. A new SEAL team record broken. It made him uneasy. Not because he thought she cheated, but because he was remembering how she had stood there, perfectly calm, when he'd ripped her shirt. There was no shock, no anger. It was like it didn't even register. like she had seen things so much worse that a little confrontation meant nothing to her. He pushed his tray away, his appetite suddenly gone. Across the room, Laya sat alone. She ate her food with a quiet, efficient rhythm. Chicken, rice, vegetables, good fuel. She paid no attention to the whispers or the sideways glances. It was just a pattern. 4 bites, a sip of water, 4 more bites, repeat. From the serving line, Hayes watched her. Even the way she ate was disciplined, almost mechanical. He'd seen men eat like that before, prisoners of war. People who had been starved and had learned to make every single calorie count, because they never knew when they'd get another meal. Later that night, in his quarters, Commander Reed was wide awake. He couldn't shake the image of Laya from the training video. The way she moved, it reminded him of someone, a ghost, from a mission nearly 20 years ago. He was just 19 years old then, a brand new Navy SEAL on a simple convoy escort mission in Syria. Their job was to protect some high-value analyst moving between safe houses. The analyst was a small, quiet woman. Reed barely even noticed her. And then the roadside bomb went off. The world erupted in fire and smoke as the truck ahead of them just disappeared. The force of the blast flipped Reed's Humvee like a toy, and he remembered the sky and the ground swapping places over and over. When it stopped, he was trapped, a mess of mangled steel crushing him, his own blood pooling around him as his vision tunneled to black. That's when he felt them small hands pulling at him. And a voice, impossibly calm in the middle of all that chaos. Stay with me. Breathe in for 4, out for 4. It was the analyst. She had somehow pulled him from the wreck, gotten him behind cover, and was now applying perfect pressure to his wounds. She called in the rescue chopper and never left his side. Reed lost consciousness before he could truly see her face. He woke up in a hospital tent, and she was gone. The official report was a dead end, a civilian contractor whose identity was classified. For years, he searched for the ghost who saved his life just to say thanks. Now, he shot bolt upright in his bunk, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his chest. 4 in, 4 out. Reed remembered her whisper. That simple breathing pattern wasn't just a trick, it was a key. He flipped his laptop open and dove into the classified archives. He ran a search. Every civilian contractor in Syria between 2017 and 2019. Then, he filtered by medical and intelligence personnel women between 25 and 30 years old. 43 names appeared. Still too many. He added more keywords. Certifications in combat casualty care, human intelligence training, specific dialects. The list shrank. 20 names, then 10, then 5. Finally, one single file loaded, and the words next to her name made the blood freeze in his veins. Captain Laya Anders. Assignment: Ghost Hawk Intelligence Cell. Status: Killed in action, 2019. Record sealed. Reed stared at the screen, unable to process it. KIA. But she was here, on this base. Not just alive, but outperforming everyone. This meant one of two things. Either the entire military database was wrong, or someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to fake her death. The next morning, the second mission simulation began. A new recruit, Private Lee, a kid fresh out of Ohio, was trying too hard to prove himself. He hit an obstacle wall too fast and misjudged the climb. His grip slipped. He fell 12 feet, landing with a horrifying crunch on the gravel below. A sharp, piercing scream cut through the morning air. His left leg was bent at an angle that just wasn't natural, making even the most hardened soldiers cringe. A shard of white bone had punched right through his fatigues, and a dark pool of blood was already spreading beneath him. Compound fracture. For a long second, everyone was frozen in shock. Someone finally yelled, "Medic!" But the medic was 300 yards away, dealing with a minor sprain. It would take him at least 5 minutes to get there. Lee just kept screaming, his squad mates forming a useless circle around him as panic began to set in. Then, like she appeared out of nowhere, Laya was there. She knelt by his side, her voice cutting right through the noise. Lee, look at me. His eyes, wide with pain and fear, found hers. Breathe with me, she said, her voice soft but firm. In for 4. She took a deep, deliberate breath to show him. Lee choked back a sob, trying to follow her lead. Out for 4. Slowly, his panicked gasps began to steady, but Laya was already moving. She pulled a small kit from her cargo pocket. It was packed with combat gauze, a SAM splint, and nitrile gloves. Where on earth did she get that? That was not standard equipment for a liaison officer. She snapped the gloves on with a practiced flick of her wrist. This is going to hurt, she stated calmly, but if I don't set this now, you're going to lose this leg. Do you understand me? Lee, with tears streaming through the grime on his face, managed a weak nod. Laya moved with a speed and precision that was almost hypnotic. She packed the wound with gauze, applying firm, direct pressure to slow the bleeding. Her hands were rock steady, no fumbling, no wasted motion. She kept talking, her voice calm and clinical. The body can lose about 15% of its blood volume before shock sets in. You're at about 8%. You're fine. You're gonna be fine. Lee clung to her words as if they were a lifeline. She expertly splinted his leg, immobilizing the fracture. Then she pulled out a radio. It wasn't the standard issue training model. It was smaller, more advanced. She keyed the microphone. This is NATO training actual, she said, her voice crisp and clear. I need an immediate medevac. I have 1 casualty. Compound fracture of the left tibia and fibula. Bleeding is controlled. Patient is stable but requires surgical intervention within the next 30 minutes. She then flawlessly rattled off a 9-line report, the kind combat medics use when they're under fire. It was perfect. Line 1, the grid coordinates. Line 2, her radio frequency. Line 3, number of patients. Line 4, special equipment required. All the way down to line 9, patient nationality. The soldiers standing around her were speechless. That wasn't something you learn in a classroom. You learn that by calling in real helicopters while bullets are snapping past your head, knowing that a single mistake could cost someone their life. The helicopter was on the ground just 7 minutes later. Medics rushed out, took one look at Lee, and got him onto a stretcher. The lead paramedic paused. Who stabilized him? He asked. Someone pointed at Laya. The paramedic studied her handiwork, the neatly packed wound, the perfectly secured splint. This is textbook, he said, shaking his head in amazement. No, actually, this is better than textbook. You just saved this kid's leg. Laya stood up and peeled off her bloody gloves. He did the hard work. He stayed calm. But the paramedic wasn't convinced. Ma'am, I've been doing this for 15 years. What you just did, that's tactical combat casualty care. TCSC. Where did you get that kind of training? Laya didn't answer. She simply turned and walked away, leaving a stunned crowd of soldiers whispering in her wake. Hayes pushed through the group. He looked from the dark stain of blood on the gravel to the discarded medical wrappers. His eyes narrowed. TCCC wasn't for liaison officers. It was for medics, for rangers, for special forces operators, the people sent into places where help isn't coming anytime soon. He bent down and picked up a glove wrapper. It was military issue, but the lot number was old, from before 2020. That meant she'd been carrying these in a personal medkit for years. She was always prepared for the worst. Hayes carefully folded the wrapper and put it in his pocket. Across the base at the field hospital, Lee was being prepped for the operating room. They had called his mom, and the doctors were confident he would make a full recovery. The surgeon in charge was reviewing the intake forms when he stopped and frowned. Who did the field work on this soldier? He asked a nurse. This is graduate-level trauma management. The nurse glanced at the chart. A Captain Anders, sir. She's a liaison officer. The surgeon read the notes again, then picked up his phone and dialed the base commander. Sir, he said, we might have a problem. Or we might have a secret weapon. I'm not sure which. Later that afternoon, Laya was ordered to report to Major Owen Cross's office. Cross was a by-the-book administrator, a thin, balding man who seemed to love regulations more than people. He didn't even look up when she entered. Captain Anders. I've been asked to take a look at your medical training history. Laya stood perfectly still. Sir? Cross slid a thin file across the desk. According to your official service record, you took a basic first aid course 6 years ago. There is nothing else. Certainly nothing that would qualify you to perform an emergency medical procedure in the field. He finally met her eyes. And yet, today you executed a flawless 9-line medevac and provided TCCC level care. Care that, in the head surgeon's professional opinion, saved Private Lee's leg and possibly his life. Laya said nothing. Cross leaned back, his chair creaking. So, either our official records are completely wrong, or you're hiding a rather impressive skill set. Which is it, Captain? I learned through experience, sir. What experience? Previous assignments. Cross's eyes narrowed into slits. Your file says you were stationed at Fort Bragg and Ramstein Air Base. Both were desk jobs. No field time, no deployments, Cross pressed on. So I'll ask you again, where exactly did you get this experience? Laya met his stare without a hint of fear. Sometimes, sir, skills are learned outside of official channels. Cross stared at her for a long, heavy moment before snapping the file shut. I'm going to pretend we never had this conversation. But you need to understand, Captain. People are starting to ask questions about you. And when people start asking questions, they tend to find answers, whether you like it or not. Laya gave a sharp nod. Understood, sir. She turned and walked out. Cross watched her go, then immediately picked up his phone. Colonel Hale, we have a situation with Captain Anders. That night, the group chat for Foster's platoon was blowing up. Someone had posted photos of Laya working on Lee. They sat in the dark, watching the security footage play on a loop. Leia saving Lee's life in the training yard. It was Hayes who finally broke the silence. I ran the lot numbers on her medical gear. That stuff was made back in 2018. The kit is more than 6 years old, which means she's been carrying her own personal trauma kit for that entire time, Reed said, almost to himself. And the way she talked Lee down, kept him from panicking, that was textbook psychological first aid, PFA. They drill that into people who have to deal with intense combat stress. Hayes nodded slowly. Yeah, special operators, combat medics, people who see horrific injuries so often they need a playbook just to keep their patients from going into shock. Reed rubbed his forehead, leaning closer to the screen. That's not even the half of it. I found something else, buried deep in the classified database. Imagine being one of the most elite soldiers in the world, a true ghost, only to have your life erased and be forced to hide in plain sight. Every day you go to an office, sit at a desk, and let people walk all over you, thinking you're weak, thinking you're a nobody. That's Laya's life right now. But what happens when a ghost gets tired of hiding? Stick around to find out. And hey, if you love a good underdog story, make sure you hit that subscribe button. You see, two men were starting to connect the dots. Have you ever heard of a unit, Reed began, called the Ghost Hawk Intelligence Cell? They were a Black Ops team running missions in Syria and Iraq from 2017 to 2019. Recon, intel, gathering, and taking out the trash when they had to. What happened to them? Hayes asked, his voice low. Reed's expression hardened. The whole operation got shut down hard in 2019. The official story is that most of the team was killed in action, and any possible survivors, their records were completely scrubbed, sealed tight. And Laya? Reed nodded, listed as KIA, but the official report is full of holes. They never recovered a body, never had any real confirmation. They just presumed she was dead after an extraction went sideways. Hayes leaned in, his focus entirely on Reed. You think she was a ghost hawk? I think someone wanted the entire world to believe she was 6 feet under, Reed said. And now she just happens to show up here, pretending to be a simple desk jockey, letting everyone make fun of her, letting them all think she's completely harmless. People don't just vanish from the official record unless they're running from something or hunting someone. Captain Laya's file says she's a paper pusher, an analyst, but her skills tell a totally different story. So, what's her secret? Drop your theories in the comments, and if you love a good mystery, share this with a friend. Let's crack this case together. The real test came just 2 days later. An encrypted message shot out from a base in Poland, carrying the targeting data for a critical drone exercise. Simple enough, except the only cryptographer on base was down with a wicked case of food poisoning, and that code had to be broken in the next 20 minutes, or the entire mission would be a bust. Have you ever been publicly thrown under the bus by a boss who wanted to see you fail? That's the exact trap being set for Captain Laya. Not decoding those coordinates meant the whole multi-million-dollar exercise was a wash, a massive embarrassment for the entire command. Seeing his chance to humiliate her, Colonel Hale called Laya into the crowded comms center. "Captain," he said, his voice oozing with fake concern, "Specialist Vega is down for the count. Our replacement won't land for another 45 minutes, but we only have 20. As the senior intelligence officer, I'm sure you can handle this." Every single person in that room stared, just waiting for the crash and burn. Do you think she can pull it off? Stick around to find out. Hale walked out with a smug grin plastered on his face. The clock on the wall felt like it was ticking down to an explosion. Another officer, Foster, sidled up to her, crossing his arms. "Hey, Captain, there's no shame in admitting you're out of your league. Just say the word." Laya didn't even give him a glance. She just slid into the chair and stared at the absolute mess of scrambled code on the screen. 10 seconds passed, then 20. Someone in the back whispered, "She's clueless." But then her fingers finally moved not to the keyboard, but to a pen and a blank sheet of paper. "Gotta go old school," she muttered under her breath. "Caesar variant with a rotating key seated by the timestamp." Foster just scowled, completely lost. Laya tuned him out, her pen flying across the page as she scribbled down columns of numbers and letters, matching them against the message's digital timestamp. Her hands moved with a blur of focused energy that silenced the entire room. What should have taken a team of experts hours, she was tearing through in minutes. The clock ticked past 5, then 8, the only sound, the frantic scratching of her pen on paper. And then she stopped. She spun to the keyboard and typed out a long, unbroken string of characters, hitting enter with a final, decisive tap. The scrambled mess on the screen instantly resolved into clean, readable text coordinates, mission details, the whole package. A nearby technician just gaped, his mouth hanging open. How in the world? Laya simply stood up. "The message is broken. Get it to the exercise coordinator." She slid her pages of notes to a bewildered Foster and strode out of the room as if she'd just been solving a crossword puzzle. Total time, 11 minutes and 42 seconds. Foster stared down at the paper, a chaotic masterpiece of calculations and cipher keys that represented a career's worth of knowledge. He flipped it over. There, tucked into a corner so small he almost missed it, was a handwritten note. 2 letters and a number. NH7. What could that possibly mean? He quickly took a photo and fired it off to his intelligence contact, Hayes. "Found this on the analyst's scratch paper. Does NH7 ring any bells?" The moment Hayes saw the message, a cold dread washed over him. He didn't hesitate. He forwarded it straight to Commander Reed. "Sir, you need to run this. Now." Reed pulled up the image, zooming in on the tiny script. NH7, Nightingale 7. His blood ran cold. He navigated to the classified archives, and there it was. Nightingale 7, the call sign for a Ghost Hawk operative, a master cryptographer. Status, killed in action, 2019. Reed's fingers trembled as he tried to access the full personnel file, but a bright red banner slammed across his screen. Access denied. He didn't have the clearance. He immediately shot a priority request up the chain to his SEAL Command liaison. Less than 10 minutes later, his secure line buzzed. "Commander Reed, this is Captain Ashford at JSOC. You just tried to open a file that's been under seal for 5 years. You have my undivided attention." Reed chose his next words, like he was disarming a bomb. "Sir, I have a credible reason to believe an operator listed as KIA may, in fact, be alive and operating under a new identity." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. "Do not move. Do not speak to anyone else about this." A team is en route to your position. Reed ended the call and met Hayes' worried gaze. We just stepped on a landmine. The very next morning, Laya was told she had one final evaluation, a live fire extraction drill. She and a team of 4 trainees were tasked with rescuing a high-value asset from a simulated hostile compound. The opposition would be role players, using simunition rounds, basically paintballs that sting like hell but won't put you in the ground. It was supposed to be the most realistic, high-stress test they had. The team assembled at 0600 hours. Laya joined the team leader, Briggs, along with Chen and 2 others, Novak and Torres. Briggs laid out the mission. This is a simple smash and grab. People, we breach, clear 3 rooms, secure the package, and we're out. They're expecting light resistance, so we should be drinking coffee in 15 minutes. They kitted up, slapping magazines full of the paint marking rounds into their rifles. The target building was a decaying 2-story warehouse with plenty of entry points. Their target, a man in a bright orange vest, was waiting for them somewhere inside. They stacked up by the main entrance as Briggs started the countdown. 3, 2, 1, go! The door exploded inward, and they flooded into the building. Instantly, they knew something was terribly wrong. The floor plan was completely different from the blueprints they'd studied. A long hallway stretched out where a wall was supposed to be. Briggs swore under his breath. Intel is garbage! On the fly, people! They pushed deeper. The first room was a bust. The second held 2 hostiles, and Chen and Torres dropped them with quick, precise bursts of paint. But then more appeared from the shadows. A lot more. This wasn't light resistance, it was an ambush. First 6, then 8, then 10 hostiles were pouring fire on them. They were hopelessly outgunned. Fall back! Break contact! Briggs shouted, but it was already too late. A volley of paint rounds slammed into Torres' chest. He was down. Novak took 3 rounds to his back and crumpled to the floor. Chen yelled over the chaos that he was out of ammo. I'm dry! I'm dry! A round caught Briggs in the shoulder and his arm went limp, his rifle clattering to the ground. In a blink, it was just him and Laya, trapped and completely surrounded. Laya processed the scene in a heartbeat. They'd been herded into a kill box with no cover and no way out. This wasn't a test, it was an execution. She keyed her comms. Command! This is Bravo! We are taking heavy fire and request immediate evac, the radio hissed into static. They were being jammed. Of course they were. Briggs looked over at her. His uniform splattered with paint like blood. Captain, it's over. We have to surrender. Laya just stared at the enemies closing in. Her team shattered around her. And in that moment, she made a choice. With her team pinned down, she reached into her vest and pulled out a tiny, secret radio. One using a military-grade encryption that had no business being on a training exercise. She keyed the mic, and when she spoke, her voice was utterly transformed. Gone was the quiet, nervous staff officer. In its place was a voice that was flat, cold, and all business. Nightingale 7 to Overwatch. Requesting immediate extraction. Grid November Whiskey 4721. 5 personnel, 1 HVT. Authenticate Tango Hotel November. For a heart-stopping moment, there was only static. Then, a calm male voice crackled back. Nightingale 7, authentication confirmed. QRF is inbound. ETA, 2 minutes. The radio went silent. Briggs could only stare at her, his mind struggling to catch up. What in the world did you just do? Laya didn't waste a breath answering. She simply moved to cover and drew her sidearm. It was only firing paint rounds, but the woman holding it was completely different. Her shoulders were back, her chin was high. This was no longer a pencil pusher. This was a warrior. The role players who had been closing in on them actually stopped in their tracks, completely thrown by her sudden, commanding presence. And then the main door didn't just open, it blew inward. This wasn't a training charge. It was real. 4 operators in full combat gear with no identifying patches stormed into the room. They moved with the terrifying efficiency of ghosts. The role players froze solid. One of them managed to stammer, "Hey, this is just a drill." The lead operator didn't even break stride. The drill is over. Clear this area now. They didn't need to hear it twice. They vanished like smoke. The operators had the target secured and extracted in seconds. One of the operators gave Laya a short, knowing nod, and then they were gone. The entire operation took less than 90 seconds. Briggs stood in the now silent warehouse, his jaw on the floor. Who were those guys? Chen whispered, his eyes wide. Did we just get bailed out by actual special forces? Laya calmly clicked the safety on her pistol, holstered it, and turned to face her stunned team. For the very first time, she met their eyes with a gaze that was steady and unshakable. We need to debrief. Her voice was different. It was the voice of a commander, the kind you obey without a second thought. Briggs just blinked. Captain. Laya strode right past him toward the exit. Move. And they moved. They followed. Miles away in the command center, it was absolute chaos. Commander Reed was glued to the footage on a giant screen, his face drained of all color. Hayes stood right next to him. On the monitor, they watched as Leia keyed her hidden radio, Nightingale 7 to Overwatch. Reed's voice was a choked whisper. That call sign was retired in 2019. Hayes pointed a finger at the mysterious operators on the screen. And those guys? I know that gear. That's a JSOC quick reaction force. You don't call in a team like that for a training drill. Reed rewound the footage, his eyes locked on Laya's face. He watched her morph from a timid paper pusher into a stone-cold professional in the blink of an eye. She's not a liaison officer, he breathed. Hayes grunted. You don't say. Reed turned to him, the horrifying scale of the situation finally hitting him. If she's a ghost hawk and she's here under a false ID, then she's hunting someone. This isn't a drill. It's a real mission. Hunting someone, Hayes echoed, his gaze drifting to a different camera feed, this one from Colonel Hale's office. Hale was on the phone, pacing like a caged animal, his face a mask of fury. Reed's jaw tightened. Oh, no. Hayes saw it at the same moment. You think Hale is the target? Reed spoke slowly, piecing it all together. I think we need to find out what really happened in 2019 and why the Ghost Hawk program was supposedly shut down. On the screen, Laya walked out of the warehouse. She looked straight up at a security camera, as if she knew they were watching her every move. And then, she smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator that had just trapped its prey. The screen cut to black. The entire command center went into an immediate lockdown. Reed immediately made 3 frantic calls. One to JSOC, one to NATO security, and one to his own superior at SEAL Command. The message was the same for all 3. We have a major situation. A Ghost Hawk operative is active on this base. We need immediate containment and an emergency briefing. Hayes cleared the command center until only he and Reed remained. Within 15 minutes, they were joined by 2 others. General Patricia Calloway from JSOC and Colonel Hale himself, who had been summoned with no explanation. He barged in, radiating anger and confusion. Commander Reed, does somebody want to tell me why I was just dragged out of a critical planning meeting? General Calloway, a woman in her 50s with hair like steel and a gaze to match, simply stood by the monitors, her arms crossed, saying nothing. They called her the camp joke, a captain so inept she couldn't even manage a simple training exercise. For weeks, they had made her life a misery, led by the shining example of Colonel Hale, a celebrated war hero with 3 combat tours and 2 Purple Hearts. But what this decorated hero didn't realize was that the incompetent captain he loved to ridicule was about to tear his entire world apart. You're gonna want to stick around, because this is a story of epic revenge you have to hear to believe. In a secure briefing room, General Calloway pointed at a still image of that same captain. Colonel Hale, are you familiar with the Ghost Hawk intelligence cell? A shadow passed over Hale's face. Vaguely. That was years back in Syria. The whole operation was shut down. Calloway's eyes narrowed. Aborted. There's a big difference. She pointed to the screen again. What can you tell me about her? Captain Anders? Hale barely gave the photo a glance. Liaison officer? Her performance is adequate at best, but today's drill revealed some deeply concerning judgment. She used unauthorized communication channels. From across the room, Commander Reed interjected. Those channels weren't unauthorized, sir. They were classified, read clarified, reserved for JSOC's own quick reaction force. The kind of channels that only the deepest of deep cover operators should ever have access to. Hale just stared at him, dumbfounded. That's impossible. Her security clearance doesn't even come close to. Before he could finish his sentence, Sergeant Major Hayes played an audio file. The captain's voice, flat and professional, filled the silent room. Nightingale, 7 to Overwatch. Request immediate extract. The command center felt like a tomb. Calloway spoke quietly, but her words landed like grenades. Nightingale 7 was the call sign for a Ghost Hawk operative back in 2018, a specialist in signals intelligence. An operative who was officially declared killed in action after an operation was aborted in April of 2019. She turned her icy gaze on Hale. An abort that you personally authorized, Colonel. The color drained from Hale's face. That mission was compromised, he sputtered. The intel was clear. Enemy forces knew our position. I made a command decision to pull the team out. It's standard operating procedure. Calloway's voice became as hard as diamond. 3 operators died during that extraction, Colonel. They died because their air support was inexplicably pulled, because their escape route was suddenly redirected. They died because someone decided their mission and their lives were disposable. Hale's hands balled into fists at his sides. Are you accusing me of something, General? Calloway didn't flinch. I'm asking you to explain why Captain Laya Anders, a woman who has been listed as killed in action for 5 years, is currently walking around your training camp. And I'm asking why she seems so intensely interested in monitoring every single command decision you make. On the main screen, Reed pulled up a new, heavily encrypted file. I accessed the Ghost Hawk mission archives about an hour ago. It took a JSOC level override. The abort order in 2019 came just 48 hours before the team was scheduled to capture a high-value arms dealer named Konstantin Volkov. That abort order came directly from you, Colonel. The official reason you gave was an intelligence compromise, but there is zero documentation to back that up. No source, no after-action report, no evidence at all that the mission was ever at risk. Hale's jaw was clenched so hard it looked like it might shatter. My sources were confidential. I was not required to disclose them. Your sources were paid, Hayes chimed in, holding up a printed document. I pulled your financial records. Well, not your personal ones. That would require a warrant. But I did pull the records for a certain shell corporation, Hayes continued. One that happens to be registered in your wife's maiden name. On April 10th, 2019, just 2 days before you signed that abort order, a deposit of $200,000 was made into that account. The origin? A holding company with direct, traceable links to Volkov's financial network. The air in the room grew thick and heavy. Hale's face went from deathly pale to furious red. That is absolutely absurd. You have no proof that money was connected to Reed. Cut him off with a quiet, calm voice. The transfer code on that deposit is a perfect match to deposits made to 3 other officers who were later convicted on corruption charges. Same network, same payment method, same buyer. Calloway took one step forward. Colonel Hale, you are hereby relieved of your command, pending a full criminal investigation. The military police are waiting for you right outside. You will surrender your credentials and accompany them to the detention facility. Hale's eyes darted around the room, wild with trapped panic. This is a setup. You're basing this entire fantasy on circumstantial evidence and the word of a ghost. It's not just her word, Reed said. He held up his phone and played one last audio file. This time, it was Hale's own voice, captured perfectly. Captain Anders needs to go. I don't care how you do it. Reassign her, fail her evaluations, make her life so miserable she quits. Just get her out of my camp. The voice on the other end, Major Cross, sounded baffled. Sir, with all due respect, why the sudden urgency? She hasn't really caused any problems. And then came Hale's voice again, dripping with paranoia. Because if she stays here, people will start asking questions, and I cannot afford questions right now. The recording ended, and in the crushing silence, a corrupt hero's career came to a sudden, final end. Calloway just flicked an eyebrow up, That little chat took place 4 days ago, just after Captain Anders set foot on your base. Hale just stood there, shaking, without a word to say. Reed kept going. Captain Anders has been recording everything since she arrived. Every single conversation, every order you gave, and every pathetic attempt to sabotage her. She came here because she knew someone sold out her team all those years ago. She just didn't know who. So, she laid a trap. She let you humiliate her, made herself look weak and clueless, and just waited to see who'd get scared enough to slip up. Hale finally choked out some words. If she's really Ghost Hawk, she's a massive security risk. She should be the one in cuffs, not. She's a federal investigator. Calloway cut him off, her voice like ice. Operating under JSOC authority with our complete authorization to run this inquiry. You, however, Calloway said, finishing her thought, are under arrest. Right on cue, the door swung open, and 2 military police officers marched in. Hale just stared at them, at the gleaming handcuffs they were holding, and at his entire life's work turning to dust right in front of him. This is all a mistake, he whispered. No, Calloway shot back. Selling out your own soldiers for a payday was the mistake. This is just the bill coming due. As they marched Hale out of the room, the door clicked shut, filling the command center with a thick, heavy silence. Hayes finally let out a breath he'd been holding forever. Well, that went from 0 to 100 real quick. Reed was still glued to the monitor, at the faint, frozen smile on Leia's face. We have to find her. Calloway nodded. I agree. Commander, it sounds like you have some history with Nightingale 7. You want to fill us in? Reed paused for just a second, and then he told them everything. About Syria, the convoy, the massive explosion, the small hands that pulled him from the fiery wreck, and the steady voice that counted his breaths, keeping him tethered to life. Calloway took in his entire story without saying a word. When he finished, she simply said, So she saved your life all those years ago, and you never even knew who it was. Not until today, Reed confessed. But I never forgot her voice. The way she was so calm, like saving my life, was just another Tuesday for her. Hayes brought another file up on the main screen. I called in a favor with a buddy at the JSOC archives and dug up some intel on the Ghost Hawk insignia. Turns out, operatives who completed 3 successful missions were allowed to get the unit tattoo a hawk with its wings spread out. Little details in the design showed where they operated and what their specialty was. He then zoomed in on a grainy, old photograph. The photo showed the back of an operative in full combat gear, and there on their neck was the exact same tattoo Leia had. A hawk facing left means the Syria Theater of Operations, Hayes pointed out. The folded wingtips mean the operative has a redacted or secret status. And the text under the hawk is an opcode 07 Sigma. That was the official name for the Volkov interdiction mission. Calloway stared at the image. So, everyone on this base has been staring at her tattoo since day 1, but not a single person knew what they were seeing. That's because Ghost Hawk was so top secret, Reed said, that even their own insignia was classified. Unless you knew exactly what you were looking for, it just looked like a cool tattoo. And she's been wearing the truth right there on her skin this whole time, Hayes added, hiding in plain sight. Calloway turned away from the screen. Where is she right now? Reed quickly pulled up the security feed. She's in the barracks, her quarters, Reed reported. Go get her. Bring her here. It's time we all had a real conversation. Reed and Hayes found Leia in her room. She was sitting on the edge of her bunk, still dressed in the tactical gear from the training exercise. She didn't seem the least bit surprised to see them. Commander, Sergeant Major, she said, her voice perfectly level and calm. Reed stepped into the tiny room while Hayes shut the door behind them. Captain Anders, Reed began, or should I be calling you Nightingale 7? Leia met his eyes without flinching. Leia is just fine. Reed grabbed a small chair and sat down. Syria, 2018. The convoy ambush just outside of Aleppo. You were there. Leia gave a slow, measured nod. I was the analyst your team was assigned to protect. You pulled me out, Reed said, his voice cracking with emotion. My vehicle was engulfed in flames, he went on, the memory rushing back like a tidal wave. I was pinned inside. You dragged me to cover. You stopped the bleeding until the medevac helicopter could get there. You were 19 years old, Laya said softly. You were way too young to die just because somebody sold your location to the highest bidder. Reed blinked, completely floored. What? That ambush was no accident, Laya explained. Someone on the inside leaked our route. We lost 2 good Marines that day. You were almost the third. Ghosthawk launched an investigation and found whispers of corruption, but we could never pin down who was responsible. Hayes, who had been leaning silently against the wall, finally spoke up. So JSOC sent you back in, undercover, to smoke out the rat. Laya got up and walked over to the window. Not officially. Officially, I died in 2019 when Colonel Hale called off the Volkov operation. My body was never found, she continued, so they closed the book on it. But JSOC always had a gut feeling that Hale was the leak. They just needed undeniable proof. So, they cooked up a new identity for me. A liaison officer with a spotless record and 0 field experience. They turned me into someone he would write off as a complete nobody. Reed shook his head, still trying to wrap his mind around it. You let him tear you down. You let every single person on this base walk all over you for weeks. It was to gather evidence, Laya corrected, turning to face them. I needed him to get comfortable, to believe I was totally harmless. Every insult, every time he messed with my drills, every single public humiliation, I recorded all of it. I built a clear pattern of behavior that proved he was targeting me specifically, which only makes sense if he was terrified that I knew who he really was. Hayes finally understood. But if he knew you were Ghosthawk, why would he come after you so openly? Wouldn't that just put a spotlight on him? Because he's not smart, Laya said with a tiny, cold smile. He's just a coward. The second I showed up, his only instinct was to make me go away before anyone else could put the pieces together. He thought if he could break me and get me to wash out of the program fast enough, no one would ever ask any questions. Reed stood up. You used yourself as bait. I used myself as a test, Laya corrected him again. A test to see if Colonel Hale would lose his nerve. And he did, in spectacular fashion. She pulled a tiny device out of her pocket. It was a digital recorder. Every single conversation. Every order he gave to rig my equipment. Every attempt to isolate and belittle me. It's all right here. It's solid evidence of command abuse. And when you put that next to his bank records, it proves exactly why he did it. He knew Ghosthawk was coming back. He just didn't realize it was me until this morning. Hayes let out a low whistle. You played him like a fiddle. Laya's face was like stone. 3 of my teammates are dead because he took a bribe to abort a mission. This was never a game. It's about justice. Reed finally asked the question that was bugging him. Why did you let it go so far? The shirt? That public humiliation? You could have exposed him way sooner. Laya looked right at him, her eyes burning with intensity. Because outing myself only proves that I'm alive. It doesn't prove he's corrupt. I needed Hale to show his own cards, to prove he was desperate enough to destroy an officer he supposedly had no history with. That kind of desperation is what gets you a conviction. Just then, the door opened. Calloway walked in. Captain Anders, you're wanted in the briefing room right away. As they walked across the base, soldiers stopped and stared. The news that something major was going down had already begun to spread. Hale's arrest. Military police swarming the place, rumors were catching fire. Inside the briefing room, a panel was already waiting. Calloway, 2 investigators from JAG, a legal officer, and, sitting off to the side, looking like they wanted to be anywhere else, were Corporal Briggs and Lieutenant Foster. Laya stopped and looked at them. Briggs jumped to his feet as she entered. Captain Anders, I need to apologize for my actions, for how I treated you. Foster gave a sharp nod. We both do. We were told you were just some officer who couldn't cut it. We never thought to question it. Laya studied them calmly. You were following orders from a man you trusted. That's no excuse, Briggs said, his voice firm now. I'm the one who tore your shirt. I shamed you in front of everyone, and I am truly sorry. For what it's worth, I'm ready to testify about every single order Hale gave me. Foster spoke up. I also recovered his encrypted emails from the server. There are messages with Cross and the others, mapping out all the ways they plan to make you fail. It's all right there in black and white. Laya gave a slow, deliberate nod. Thank you. Calloway gestured toward the table. Captain Anders, please take a seat. We need to get your full statement. Laya sat down. The recorder started. For the next 20 minutes, she laid out everything. She laid it all bare. Her true identity, the botched Ghost Hawk mission, the deaths, her private investigation, her arrival at this camp, every act of sabotage and humiliation she'd faced, the clear pattern in Hale's predatory behavior, and every piece of evidence she had meticulously gathered. When she finished, a heavy silence filled the room until Calloway finally spoke. Captain, I have to ask, you endured weeks of this abuse. You let everyone believe you were weak, that you were incompetent. Why didn't you just have Hale arrested from the start? Laya glanced down at her folded hands. Because arresting one man doesn't fix a broken system. It just removes a single bad apple. I had to prove that the system itself allowed this to happen, that it was possible for someone to target an officer, destroy their career, and obliterate their reputation, and no one would even question it. Everyone here saw me get torn down. Everyone watched, and the vast majority said nothing, she said, lifting her gaze. That's the real problem, not just Hale. He's a symptom of the disease. The sickness is the culture that let him operate with impunity for so long. The legal officer leaned forward. So, this whole charade wasn't just about catching Hale. It was an expose on the entire framework that enabled him. And to create an undeniable record, Laya affirmed. So the next person who tries to speak up has proof that the system has failed before and that it was forced to correct itself. Accountability isn't just about punishment. It's about forcing change. Calloway gave a slow, deliberate nod. I see. For the record, your methods were highly unorthodox, Captain, but I can't argue with the results. She turned to the investigators. Your recommendations? One of them started the list. A complete audit of Colonel Hale's command decisions, going back 5 years. A thorough review of every personnel file he ever touched. We're setting up an anonymous reporting system so soldiers can flag retaliation without fear. And mandatory training on command climate and harassment prevention is being implemented immediately. The second investigator added, and we are formally recognizing the Ghost Hawk program. That unit has operated in the shadows for far too long. It's time those operators get the credit they've earned. Calloway agreed. Get it done. Captain Anders, you are officially cleared of all wrongdoing. Your rank and status are fully reinstated. Your service as Ghost Hawk will be entered into your official record with all due commendations. Leia just nodded. Thank you, ma'am. Calloway then rose from her chair. There is one more thing. JCOC wants to offer you an instructor position at the SERE school, teaching survival and resistance techniques to the next generation of special forces. You've proven you can endure the worst of it. We need people like you training our best. Laya paused for a long moment before answering. I appreciate the offer, ma'am, but I'm not done here yet. Calloway raised an eyebrow. Done with what? Laya offered no reply. The meeting was over. As the room emptied, Reed lingered behind. Can I ask you something? She looked at him. It's about Syria, he said quietly. When you got me out, you could have left me. You could have just taken the intel and escaped. That was the smart play. You were 19, Laya said, her voice soft. And you were still breathing. That made it an easy call. A knot formed in Reed's throat. I never got to thank you for that. You just did, Laya replied, rising to her feet. It's been a long day, Commander. You should get some rest. She started for the door, then paused. And Reed, you turned out all right. I'm glad I got to see it. And with that, she was gone. Reed sat alone in the silent room, noticing his hands were shaking. It wasn't fear. It was a tidal wave of relief, sorrow, and overwhelming gratitude crashing over him all at once. It took years to find justice. It took impossible patience. And it took someone willing to walk through hell itself to drag the truth into the light. Do you think you could have shown that kind of strength? If this story moved you, hit that thanks button, and don't forget to subscribe. because Phase 2 is coming, and it's going to be even more intense. That night, a profound stillness fell over the base. Hale was locked away in the brig. His office was sealed shut, his files confiscated. Word spread like wildfire. Soldiers who had openly sneered at Laya just days before now couldn't meet her eyes. Some looked ashamed, others were just baffled, and a handful seemed angry not at her, but at themselves for being blind, for not questioning, for just going along with the herd. In the mess hall, Hayes was quietly sipping a coffee when Sergeant Carter sat across from him. "I heard about Captain Anders, about who she really is." Hayes simply nodded. "You heard right." Carter shook his head in disbelief. "I saw her on the range. I knew that shooting wasn't normal, but I told myself it was a fluke, a lucky shot, anything but the truth right in front of my face." "We all see what we want to see," Hayes said quietly. "She was counting on it." Carter was quiet for a minute. "So, you think she's staying?" "I doubt it," Hayes admitted. "People like her, they don't stay in one place for long. They're always hunting something." Carter got up and left Hayes to his thoughts. He remembered the perfect triangles of spent shell casings, the absolute control Leia had over her own breathing, her iron discipline. In his 32 years of service, he'd met thousands of soldiers, but never anyone who could turn humility into a weapon like she did, transforming weakness into a shield and patience into a blade. It was both terrifying and magnificent. Back in her barracks, Leia sat on her bunk, turning the challenge coin over and over in her palm. The worn, polished metal caught the dim light. A hawk was engraved on one side. The serial number GH07114 was on the other. She set it carefully on the nightstand. Then, she opened her laptop. The screen's glow lit up the small, dark room. Her inbox showed a single new message from an encrypted sender with no subject line. She clicked it open. The message was brutally simple. "Tower 4 sends its regards, target confirmed. Ramstein Air Base, Germany. Your ETA is 72 hours. Operation Nightfall Phase 2 authentication is Tango Hotel, November." Below the text were 3 attachments. She opened the first, a highly detailed map of Ramstein, with key buildings, flight paths, and security patrol routes all highlighted. The second file contained personnel data on 3 individuals, 2 men, 1 woman. Their names were redacted, but their job titles told the story: logistics, contracting, and finance. The third attachment was a single chilling line in bold red text: "Eliminate the network, recover the funds, restore accountability." Leia stared at the screen, her face unreadable. Phase 2. She knew it was coming. Hale was just one rotten branch. The corrupt network that had propped him up, the one that profited from the chaos and gambled with soldiers' lives for money, was still out there. JC didn't just want it trimmed, they wanted it burned to the root, and they'd handed her the match. She closed the laptop, letting her head rest against the cool metal wall. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest. Weeks of absorbing punches, swallowing insults, and projecting utter weakness had taken a brutal toll. It was more than physical. It was soul-crushing. There's a price for letting people treat you like you're nothing, for watching them laugh at your pain. But the mission had succeeded. Hale was finished. The foundations of the system were already starting to shift. And now she had the green light to go after the rest of them. She stood and moved to the window. The base was blanketed in darkness, with only a few lights dotting the landscape as sentries walked their rounds. Everything looked normal, peaceful. And then she saw him. A lone figure stood by the perimeter fence, too distant to make out features, but their gaze was fixed directly on her window. She didn't move a muscle, just watched. The figure raised a pair of binoculars. They observed her for about 10 seconds, lowered them, and then lifted a radio to their mouth. Leia couldn't hear the words, but she knew the message. "The Hawk is active. Proceed with Phase 2. The figure turned and dissolved back into the night. Leia stood by the window for a long time after. She didn't feel triumphant. She just felt tired, worn down by the endless hunt, tired of living in the shadows, of pretending to be someone she wasn't. But her exhaustion didn't matter. The mission mattered. The 3 operators who died back in 2019 mattered. The The countless others betrayed by men like Hale, they mattered. Justice isn't loud or fast. It's patient. It's methodical. And it is absolutely relentless. And she was the best there was. Turning from the window, she pulled her go bag from under the bunk and started packing. Clothes, a medkit, the challenge coin, her sidearm, everything she'd need for the flight to Ramstein. A sharp knock sounded at her door. She froze, her hand dropping instinctively to her weapon. "It's Reed." She let out a slow breath and pulled the door open. There was Reed, propped against the opposite wall, looking like he'd been through a war. "Couldn't get my head to shut up," he mumbled, his voice gravelly from exhaustion. "Knew you'd be the same." Laya stepped aside, and he trudged past her into the tiny room. He dropped into the worn-out armchair. She settled on the edge of the cot. The quiet in the room was heavy until he finally spoke. "You're ditching us." He wasn't asking. "Tomorrow," she replied softly, "way before sunrise." "Ramstein," he said, the name a flat statement. Laya's expression shifted. "Just a fraction. How'd you piece that together?" "Because I know how you operate," Reed said, his gaze unwavering. "You don't just kill the viper at your feet and walk away. You hunt it all the way back to its den. Hale was just the bite. You're going after the venom. And you need to find out who started it." Reed finished for her. "That's right." He leaned forward, his voice dropping with sincerity. "Let me handle this." Laya simply shook her head. "This isn't your fight, Reed. You saved my life," he insisted. "I owe you this much." "You don't owe me anything," she countered, her tone soft but absolute. "You survived, and you turned into a damn good officer. That's more than enough payment for me." Reed went quiet for a beat. "When I was 19, bleeding out in that Humvee," he started, his voice barely a whisper, "I remember thinking my time was up, and I was at peace with it. I signed the papers, I knew the risks, but then you were there, pulling me free, and you said something to me that I have never forgotten." "What was that?" Laya asked gently. Reed met her gaze directly. "You said, 'Not today, not on my watch.' And for some reason, I believed you, and you were right." Laya glanced away. "I was just doing my duty." "No," Reed said, his voice firm. "That was just you being you. We need someone who doesn't give up, someone who never, ever leaves a comrade behind," he said, pushing himself to his feet. "Someone who will fight for what's right, no matter the personal cost." He stepped toward her. "Look, if you're gonna hunt these guys down, you shouldn't have to do it alone. We have resources, backup. You don't have to shoulder this burden by yourself." A ghost of a smile touched Laya's lips. "I appreciate that, Commander, really. But some hunts are better handled solo. You bring in a whole team, and your target just disappears into the woodwork." Reed gave a slow, understanding nod. "Okay, then just promise me this. When it's done, when you've torn their entire network apart, you'll take a real break. Let someone else carry the world for a while." Laya's silence was its own answer. With a heavy sigh, Reed walked to the door and paused. "Laya, thank you for all of it." She simply nodded in reply. "Get some rest, Commander," she said quietly. He slipped out of the room, and the lock clicked shut behind him. She methodically shoved the last of her gear into her pack, then laid down on the cot, fully dressed, staring at the blank ceiling. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. It rarely visited her anyway. Her mind was a constant carousel of faces she couldn't save, their last words echoing in the silence. But then there were the others, Reed, Lee, and a handful more. The ones she times did times save. That had to count for something, right? The ceiling fan spun in lazy, hypnotic circles, casting shifting shadows across the room. She started her ritual. Breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, over and over. Little by little, the knots in her muscles loosened, the storm in her head quieted, and she finally drifted away. Her eyes snapped open at 4:30 in the morning, while the world was still cloaked in black. She was dressed in minutes, her bag slung over her shoulder as she slipped out of the silent barracks. The base was a ghost town. The only movement, the distant, lonely silhouettes of a few guards on patrol. She navigated her way to the motor pool, located the vehicle she'd been assigned, and tossed her bag into the back. The engine rumbled to life with a satisfying growl. As she drove through the main gate, she glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The camp's lights dwindled behind her, swallowed by the pre-dawn gloom. She thought about Hale, Briggs, and Foster, every man who had ever looked at her and seen a small, quiet woman they could easily brush aside. They were all about to get a master class in why quiet doesn't mean weak and how patience can be the deadliest weapon of all. She turned the truck east, heading for the airfield, for Germany, for the next piece of the puzzle. From his office window, Hayes watched her taillights vanish down the road. He raised his coffee mug in a silent toast. Have you ever been so completely erased that you start to wonder if you ever really existed? That's what they did to Leia. One day, she was the Ghost Hawk, the rising star of an elite team called 07 Sigma. The next, she was a ghost in a different way, a dead woman walking. Her entire team was wiped out, betrayed by the very people they trusted, and the official story buried them as failures. But they made one huge mistake. They didn't make sure she was actually gone. If you want to see how one forgotten soldier can take down an entire corrupt system, you're going to want to hear this. Leia's new life was a world away from the silent, lethal one she'd known. She lived in a tiny apartment that always smelled like rain and old takeout boxes, working a cash-only job bussing tables. No one ever looked at her twice. To them, she was just another face in the crowd, tired and invisible. But every night, she'd go home, lock the door, and take out a heavy, engraved challenge coin. On one side, a hawk with its wings spread wide. On the other, the team's motto, silent, lethal, forgotten. It had been a gift from her commander, a man who saw potential in her when she was just a scrappy kid. "We're the ghosts in the machine, Leia," he'd told her. "We make sure the world stays safe, even if no one knows we exist." Now, they were all ghosts, and she was the only one left to haunt the men who'd put them in their graves. Her first target wasn't a general or a politician. It was a pencil pusher, a low-level data clerk named Arthur. Leia didn't go in with guns blazing. Instead, she accidentally spilled a coffee on him outside his office building. While pretending to frantically clean his suit, she lifted his security badge, cloned it in seconds with a device hidden in her palm, and slipped it back, all with a flurry of apologies. The next night, she was inside his office, not looking for files, but for a simple password hint stuck to his monitor. It was a kid's drawing of a dog named Sparky. It was almost too easy. With that, she was in the system, a ghost in the machine once more. She didn't delete anything. She just changed a single digit in a bank routing number for an upcoming illegal payment. A small surprise that would cause a huge panic. The money trail led her to her next target, but also to a shocking discovery. The person orchestrating the payments was a man she once trusted, a former handler who she thought had her back. She set up a meet, pretending to be a desperate woman on the run, ready to sell out. But as he leaned in, she noticed the glint of a wire. It was a trap. In a flash, the quiet cafe turned into chaos. Leia used a sugar dispenser as a smokescreen and was out the back door before anyone even knew what happened, leaving her old friend to explain to his bosses how he'd let a ghost slip right through his fingers. The real prize, the big reveal, was still out there. The breadcrumbs led her to the top, to a 4-star general who was celebrated as a national hero, General Maddox. He was the one who signed off on the mission that got her team killed. He'd sold them out for a weapons deal worth billions, painting them as incompetent soldiers to cover his tracks. Her revenge had to be as public as his praise had been. Leia found out he was receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award at a televised gala. While the world prepared to celebrate a hero, she was preparing to unmask a monster. The night of the event, as Maddox stepped onto the stage to a standing ovation, Leia, dressed as a catering staff member, slipped into the broadcast booth. With a few keystrokes, she hijacked the feed. Suddenly, the giant screens behind the general didn't show his decorated career. They showed bank statements, secret recordings, and the mission file he doctored, all with his signature at the bottom. The applause died, replaced by a stunned silence, then gasps of horror. His entire legacy crumbled in front of a live audience of millions. He wasn't escorted off stage. He was swarmed by military police. Justice, it turned out, was louder than any bullet. Weeks later, the news was still buzzing, but Laya was far away, standing on a quiet cliff overlooking the ocean. The sun was rising, and the morning light caught the challenge coin in her hand. She hadn't just gotten revenge, she had reclaimed the honor of the friends she had lost. The motto was etched forever: silent, lethal, forgotten. But they wouldn't be forgotten anymore. Laya gently placed the coin on a small pile of stones she'd made, one for each member of her team. She was no longer a ghost haunted by the past, but a woman who had brought the truth into the light. And the moral of her story is simple. You can try to bury the truth, and you can try to erase the past, but a promise to a friend is something that never, ever dies.